Now, if this is right, that is, if foreign occupation is the main trigger to suicide terrorism, what should we expect if we get more occupation? More suicide terrorism. And that's the world since 2004. Since 2004, there have been over 1,800 suicide attacks. Think about that for a moment. From 1980 to 2003, just 300 in a 24-year period of time. In 6 years, since 04, 1,800. 6 times as many in a fourth the time.
Sorry to interrupt you. Pakistan, why Pakistan there is no foreign occupation?
You're gonna give me about 5 minutes, sir. We'll go right to it, okay? So I definitely understand. He wants to know about Pakistan, and we'll be right there. But let me just continue. These attacks, these 1,800 attacks, are not just scattered all around the world. As you're going to see, they are concentrated in the areas of occupation. They are concentrated. And notice how, with these 1,800, we now have over 2,200 data points in our database. For this finding to be wrong, we would have had to have missed not just 5 suicide attacks around the world, or even 50 suicide attacks around the world. There would literally have to be hundreds of suicide attacks occurring around the world, not in countries on this chart. I don't mean we undercounted or overcounted Iraq by 200. I mean there would have to be 200 occurring in Bangladesh, Mozambique, South Africa, or Brazil. That's what it would take to undermine the finding. Now, I can't literally swear that our team has got every single attack, but I don't think we've missed even 5. I certainly don't think we've missed 50, and I'm sure we have not missed hundreds of attacks. And I think you would know if we had missed hundreds of attacks as well, because those attacks would have had to occur in the last few years, and you'd be able to call them out. Oh, where's those 200 attacks in Bangladesh? And they're just simply not there. This is strong confirmation for the logic that suicide terrorism is mainly a product of foreign occupation. Notice how many are also anti-American. In the year 2000, that is the year before 9/11, there were 20 suicide attacks around the world. 1 against the U.S. coal, anti-American, 5%. Last year, there were 300 suicide attacks around the world, and over 270 against Americans or people working with or for America in those occupations. This is not a good pattern, ladies and gentlemen, to have 90% of suicide terrorism anti-American inspired. It's not a pattern to keep any American healthy, here or abroad. But let me talk about the specific cases, and we'll definitely get to Pakistan. First, I want to talk about Iraq. Iraq is a prime example of the strategic logic of suicide terrorism. Yes, before our invasion in March 2003, Iraq never experienced a suicide attack in its history. Since then, the suicide attacks rose, and then they came down in this distinctive 2-step pattern from 2007 on. Why did they come down, especially in this distinctive 2-step pattern? Well, the first thing you need to know is that during this period, there wasn't just one type of conflict in Iraq, there were 2. There was a 3-sided ordinary civil war where Shia Kurds and Sunnis were killing each other with ordinary violence, alongside one-sided Sunni-only suicide terrorism. We don't have a single Shia suicide attacker or Kurdish suicide attacker in Iraq. And consider that. We have plenty of Shia Islamic fundamentalists. We have plenty of militant Shia Islamic fundamentalists. Sadr, the Sadr Brigade, 20,000 strong, no suicide attacks. This is not coming just from religion or even religious extremism. Why the Sunnis? Why are they doing the suicide attacks? It's helpful to remember that Saddam wasn't just a dictator, he was a Sunni. When we toppled Saddam, we threw the Sunnis out of power in Iraq. And who would come in their place? Either an American government or a Shia-dominated government. Either way, it's the Sunnis who are most put out by the occupation. But why then does Sunni suicide terrorism come down, and come down in this distinctive two-step pattern, 07 to 08, 08, 09, etc.? Well, most people would say step one, 07 to 08, oh, Professor Pape, that's the surge. We inserted 21,000 ground troops. That's what brought down the Sunni suicide terrorism. Well, let's examine that hypothesis using the Pentagon's own numbers. If we look at the period September 06 to September 08, that's the period of the surge, the total number of coalition troops, U.S. and allies, goes down. How can that be? Because our allies were leaving faster than we were putting troops into Iraq. For the country as a whole, we were backfilling for the loss of our allies. But wait, somebody would say, well, maybe we just put them in the Sunni area. Well, let's examine that. The Sunnis live in Anbar. That's the Sunni triangle. Let's look at the number of troops in the Sunni triangle. It does go up slightly. A few extra thousand do go there. But nowhere near the 100,000 that would have had to have been there according to General Petraeus' counterinsurgency manual. And I'm pretty familiar with that manual because that manual was published by the University of Chicago Press. I was the main reader for that manuscript that encouraged its publication. I'm not opposed to General Petraeus. I'm not opposed to the counterinsurgency manual. This isn't anti-troops or anti-military. But we just did not do counterinsurgency the way the manual called for. We just didn't do it. What we did was the last call, the Sons of Iraq, also called the Anbar Awakening. Essentially what we did is we took 100,000 Sunni insurgents, terrorists, and we paid them $300 a month to do one thing: don't kill us. Yes, we'd hope you go and take that money and get a job. If you take that money and buy guns, all right, we won't say much about that. But if you want your next paycheck for $300, don't kill us. That turned out to be tremendously successful. Why? Because that empowered, using economic and political means, big part of the Sunni community to secure its way of life into the future, to defend its way of life against the Shia-dominated government, against the terrorists, and yes, even against us. And that is really the point of suicide terrorism. The purpose of suicide terrorism is the suicide terrorists believe they're helping a community protect its way of life into the future. That's what the economic empowerment did, and therefore, a big hunk of the group gave up suicide attacks.